It's the Digital Babble with your host, Zipper. Colorful commentary on your photography. Seen on fingerlakes1.com.
Hey everybody, it's the Digital Babble here on fingerlakes1.com, fingerlakes1.tv. I'm Flipper, your host for the Digital Babble every Wednesday at 7 p.m. here live. So you can email us your questions if you got questions, if you want us to cover a particular topic or something. And the topics we cover are based on photography and Photoshop. Usually I split the show into two, do a little bit of photography in the beginning, talk about different techniques, how to do different things with different portraits, different cameras. And then the second half is usually something to do with Photoshop. If I get a chance, if I run on time, then oh well. So welcome to the Digital Babble. You can go check us out at our website at www. Well, actually, don't you have to put the www anymore. It's tdbny.com. And it's just the initials of the show, newyork.com. And pretty much, you can go check out the postings out there. Jakey posts once in a while. I know he has like 4 or 5 articles in the works right now. I think he's trying to clean up. Jakey's my cat, by the way. So this week I wanted to talk a little bit more about portraits because last week it was more of a question and answer session. I had some questions and then a couple of viewers actually submitted some different photos for review. So I did that last week's show. So episode 23, I believe, which would be last week's show. And, it's just really laid back kind of thought process. I'm just trying to give you different ideas to make your shots better, help you with your camera. So if you got questions, if you got comments, if you got photos that you want to share and we can review them and talk about them, maybe take them into Photoshop, do a few things with them, you can send them right over to the Digital Babble at thedigitalbabble@gmail.com, and we'll be sure to get them on. Just make sure to include your first name or a nickname so that I know what to call you. Here, hey, these photos are from. It doesn't have to be full name. Don't want to embarrass anybody or anything like that. So this week I wanted to talk about portraits a little bit more. The third step of portraits, or this third type of portrait that you typically would do during the summer. Maybe do like senior portraits or student portraits out kind of hanging out and about. One of the fabulous parts about being a photographer, especially when you start getting clients that really appreciate your vision, your eye, and the cleanup techniques that you do on their photos, is the fact that you take what's there and you just bring out and enhance those features just ever so much more. And I really think that that's one of the biggest things is once they start seeing that quality or that level of quality, people really start to, bring around full circle the thought process of, wow, this is what I could have had. This is what I got. And I think everybody can get to those levels. It just depends on how much work and determination you're trying to put into it. So let's talk about 3/4 portraits. Okay, 3/4 portraits is basically where you take right between the knee and the hip and above, or approximately thereof, maybe from the belly button and above. So somewhere in that range, you're going from there and up. And this gives us a 3/4 portrait. A lot of senior portraits are shot this way. Depending on your environment, your lens, and what type of lighting you have, sometimes that can be very appealing, and it can be very nice portrait without making it look strange. And the reason why I mentioned making it look strange is whenever you cut the person off, so whether you're doing a head and shoulder shot right here, right about the breast area up, and you're doing a head and shoulder shot, or you're doing a 3/4 shot, or maybe you're doing a really special pose. Maybe you want them to hold their head and, kind of do something like this, and you're cutting right about here, this area in the picture. You might find that sometimes when you crop those pictures or where you kind of take those pictures, if you cut somebody off, let me see if I can do this on video. Like here's the floating hand, right? It looks strange. It looks strange no matter where I hold it on screen because I've literally cut it at the joint. You can't see it there. I literally cut it right at the joint. It almost looks like a carved turkey per se. Okay, and that's what you can kind of get a sense of or a feel of when you start cutting body parts off or pieces of the body off. depending on how you take your picture, or where you're taking your picture, so, and what you're including, what you're not including. So when we talk about like 3/4 shots, we never, well, I don't want to say never, because never say never, because there's always a time that every rule can be broken. But saying you want to take a 3/4 shot of, say, somebody standing, and they're kind of standing at you, maybe got their hand on their hip, kind of, hey baby, what's up? Then, you're going to cut them right between the knee and the hip, and you kind of want to get somewhere in the meaty part, because then it doesn't look so dismembered per se, because in your mind, in mind's mind, that leg continues on. If you cut it right at the joint, it does this whole floating hand thing. I mean, you kind of do this. It's like, ooh, is it attached to his body or not? It's kind of a weird thing to play with, especially on camera. Now that I think about it, it's just about as bad as me playing with my dolls, right? But the thing of it is it does give a sense of this dismemberment. And I remember taking some of my early shots of just senior portraits, seemed to always have this disjointment where I would cut them at the knees, or I'd cut them at the ankles, or I'd cut them at the hip, or I'd cut them at the shoulder, or I'll cut them at the wrist, or I'll cut them someplace. And when I look at the picture, I'm just like, man, it looks like their hand is just floating there. Oh man, it looks like they're just kind of hanging out in the middle, like that's the bottom of the picture, that's it. There's nothing else down there. Your mind doesn't fill it in, and I think there's something going, some type of psychosis, I guess, but that's always one thing. Whenever you're cropping a picture, and whenever you're cropping with the camera, you want to make sure not to disjoin things, such as cutting somebody off right at a joint, where it looks strange. It almost looks like, there you go, no more arm, or there you go, no more knee, or there, no more neck. I mean, whatever you want to do, it's kind of fun to think that it's just so funny to think about how strange. I've seen some really strange pictures in my time, and I just gotta say, just thinking about how bad I've done in my time on some of these pictures before too. I've had to throw out a good number of pictures because I was just like, that don't look right. So when we talk about doing 3/4 portraits, we got to remember that we got to cut them someplace, or cut things off in a meaty part. So like notice, here's my hand. Doesn't look like it's totally detached, because your mind's eye fills in that the arm continues down. But now if I go up here and I cut it off at the elbow someplace, I mean, you got the background, you can see my arm moving, but if you cut them off at the elbow, it's the same thing. Anytime you cut something at the joint, let's get right at the joint. For some reason, the mind's eye doesn't realize that it continues on. It's like, whoop, that's it. So just be aware of that when you're shooting 3/4 portraits. 3/4 portraits. Biggest thing to know about with 3/4 portraits is your aiming. Where do you aim for a 3/4 portrait? Okay, your eyes are always going to be, and your head is always going to be in the top half, and you don't want it dead center. You want it in the top half. Great example of that. Let me start getting into some examples so that we can start seeing what to play with here. And of course, my whiteboard takes a little bit to actually load here, and I do apologize. Let's see. What example would be good? Let's start with this one. So here you got a nice portrait of Kayla. She's a wonderful young lady. Did her senior portrait a few years ago, 2 years ago, something like that. Very pretty young lady. And here, this is a 3/4 shot. I'm taking 3/4 of the body, and you're seeing 3/4 of the body, but you're not seeing the lower part, the below the knee in this shot. So in this shot, where I'm aiming is actually about, I'm actually bringing the camera down. If you remember a few shows ago, we talked about how high the camera had to be. Because I'm so tall, I tend to tilt the camera down, and it distorts the picture a little bit in a bad way. I need to shrink myself or get down so that my camera lens is on the same plane as their chest. Or if I'm doing a full body portrait, I want to get them at the belly button. So that is kind of like a rule of thumb. You can break that, but it is something nice to go by. So like 3/4 portrait, you want to be right at the breast area. You want to be right at the chest, and probably the sternum is the best place to aim, really, is right in the breastbone. And you're trying to not aim up or down at the person. You're trying to aim straight at them. So that way they're all on the same film plane, the same focus plane. So when you focus this, most of their body, most of their head, most of their features are all in sharp focus, and they also look proportionally correct. You know, their head doesn't look bigger than the rest of their body, which is technically bigger. And in your eye, in your mind's eye, you don't get that distorted feeling. So that's the first thing, is get your camera at a lower level, especially if you're tall, or if you're short, you might have to come up a little bit, but you want to kind of be on the same level as the person. And you want if you notice in this picture here, her head is in the upper third or upper half, really. And that gives the portrait a sense of balance of this is a 3/4 shot. I'm getting the head, the shoulder, the chest area, the belly area, the hip area, and then I'm cutting her off right in the meat of the legs. So it doesn't look like she's like an amputee. It doesn't look like, oh, that's it. That's the end of the picture. It still lets you kind of flow down and just kind of fill in the blank. So next thing to know about like full 3/4, you got to make sure that the lighting is even as you could possibly get it. Sometimes not even lighting is good too. Depends on what you're trying to accomplish. But if you're doing like this type of shot, you're going to want to do probably, I have a basic lighting setup here. I just got to find it. Oh, can you believe I can't find it? Bottom third. Screen diagram. Let's try that. Okay, so like a basic lighting diagram, you're going to want a nice big light source. Bigger light source, the better. The sun is, of course, the biggest light source you could probably get. But you could kind of create the same thought process with a flash unit, or just maybe take a reflector or reflective piece of material, such as tin foil, white sheets, even gold sheets. You can always introduce some color cast if you want, but you just want to kind of reflect the light back at the person, but it has to be a bigger source of light. So the reflector, the bigger the reflector, the more light it's going to reflect in a broader spectrum, which is going to give you this nice broad spectrum, this big broad lighting, nice and even across the entire scene. So hopefully your entire scene is a 3/4 portrait. They're going to get nice light into the face area, under the chin, in the hairline, all over. And that's really where the nice directional light coming off camera, so you're not right on camera, you're kind of off to the right or over off to the left. And then you kind of give a little bit of light. You could accomplish this in so many different ways. I mean, you could have like one of those light stands. I mean, you could have just like a lamp bought at Walmart, and you put a high-powered bulb in with a lampshade. Or maybe not even that, just take and hang a white sheet in front of the bulb. You could do this in your house, and then put a white sheet in back of the subject about 3 to 5 feet back, so that you got some separation between the subject and the background. One of the things a lot of people do that I tend to get irritated with, and I do it myself sometimes, is that you say, hey, this is a really nice blank wall. Come on here and get in front of it, and I'll take a nice shot, and then I can cut you out and put you anywhere. And you don't get them far enough away from the background, so the light, the shade, the shadow that the body creates is harsh. It's very harsh. If you ever did you ever do like the hand puppets, the shadow puppets? You do shadow puppets, and the further away you were, the bigger, softer, shadowy it was, but the closer you were, it was really sharp. It was tack sharp shadow. That's the same thought process, The further you get away from your reflective surface that you're going to reflect the shadow on, the softer the shadow kind of becomes, and it gets filled in with other light, which then softens the shadow. So when you're shooting somebody and you say, hey, come out over here and get in front of this background, you want to make sure that you don't put them too close to the background, because typically when you do, a lot of times you get a really harsh shadow, a dark line that kind of goes right around the head, or right outlines the person. It really looks weird in my mind. I haven't seen too many successful portraits in my mind that I would say that is awesome right out of the camera, because of those shadows, because it just makes it look like they were just pasted against the thing. And if you're going to paste somebody against a wall, use a bigger, broader light or more light from multiple sources to try to minimize those shadows. So you don't get like this weird, like I said, it looks like they're cookie cutter. They're kind of like, this black line that goes around them. It looks like they're cookie cuttered out. So lighting your background, keeping a separation from the background to the person is always a good thing. Don't square up in the portraits. I don't really care for squaring people up. That's always just a lot of people do that. Here Kayla's kind of squared up, but you notice that she's got head tilt, she's got shoulder tilt, she's got a little bit of hip tilt, the legs kind of going one way or the other. The tree offers a little bit of a bend as well. This isn't my favorite portrait of Kayla, but this is a very nice portrait. It needs work, of course. Most of my stuff needs work. I think everybody's stuff needs work. And this is where I think, I could easily say that this being a nice, broadly lit portrait, you can't really see too many shadows kind of lingering anywhere. You got a little bit in the neck from the hair. You got a little bit in the cheek from the cheek, next to the nose. But really, by the end of the day, for the most part, it's a fairly broadly lit portrait. Soft, beautiful. The tones are nice. Just got to make some corrections to it. So it's really, really kind of a nice portrait. Let's see. One of the things that I always like using in 3/4 shots. I gotta find it here. I'm sorry. I'm stumbling. Let's see. Basic setup, broad setup. I just gotta find the right slide here, Phil. Flippers lost it. Okay, so if we remember, the angle of incident light is the angle of reflection light. Same concept works with shadows as well. The angle of the shadow also basically determines kind of where the shadow is going to fall after. Well, the angle of light will determine where the shadow will fall in the backdrop. So if your light's right above your camera and you fire and the backdrop's square against, behind your subject, whether it's 2 feet, 5 feet, 6 feet, 10 feet, if the angle's straight on, the shadow's going to cast all the way back to the backdrop. So that's why it's really important to get the light off the camera or off the film plane and get it somewhere away from, so the casted shadow will fall away from the backdrop and it won't show up on the backdrop or the background. So it's the same concept as the incident light versus the angle of reflection. And the same thought process. Light goes in a direction until it hits something, then it scatters, then it gets modified. So let's see. Wow, I lost one of my slides. Hang on a sec. Let's find another one of Kayla. There we go. Here again, another broad lit 3/4 shot. Here's where I goofed up. If you look at where I cut her off, I cut off her hands, many joints there. The hands are still there, but I could have done better. I really should have probably kept the hands in the picture. I also kind of cut her off almost at the hip. So if I were to crop this down any more and maybe make a couple changes, or maybe some photo edits, this would probably fail miserably, and I'd probably get that zombie look where they're cut off at the hip or they're cut off at a joint. But here's some things that were done right. Broadly lit. There's lots of light to work with. There's lots of light around her. There's lots of light being reflected off the cement. There's lots of light being reflected off the school wall. So there is a huge light source. So if you notice the shadow on the left side of the picture, but her right side against the brick wall, it's fairly soft. You see it's there, but it's really kind of soft, even though she's right against that backdrop. By using such a broad light, a broad or big source of light, you can soften those shadows to make them less pronounced and then make them part of the picture instead of being the focus of the picture. So, again, 3/4 photo, 3/4 portrait. Very nice for doing I really like doing this kind of pose for two things. One is I like doing this for little wallets, because these are kind of nice for wallets, because a lot of people hand them out and then they have an area to sign with a little marker along the left or the right. We could have shifted this picture a little bit to the right or the left, probably to the left, so she's looking into the picture. So less brick wall, more her, and then more open area on the right side of the picture. She could then sign her name, or she could sign her name with a marker. I could have scanned it in and put Kayla across it as her signature. She could have then handed those out and been like, hey, here you go. You don't have to worry about writing anything on the background, Grandma, because I'm right here, right? Or you don't have to worry about writing anything on it, Susie Q, because you're my friend, and here you go, blah, blah, blah. I always loved in high school. High school was always such an interesting time for me because it was a time for self-discovery. And while the yearbook club was going out and taking photos of everybody, I was in the background taking photos of the yearbook club. So it was kind of a funny thing. But back then we had film, so I was very conservative about how much I actually shot. But again, thinking about the high school years, some of the products we used to have, I remember we used to get, 8x10 and 11x14 and a bunch of 5x7s and some 4x6s, and then like 4 or 5 sheets of wallets, or a little bit bigger than wallets, kind of like playing cards or baseball cards. Now they got all these products where you can have baseball cards, actual weighted baseball cards that you can hand out to everybody and just be like, hey, here you go, check it out, I'm the soccer player of the year, or whatever. And it's just kind of cute that where we've come from my day of being in high school, my father's day of being in high school, and several other people in between, to today, what they have available to them or what they actually buy are two different things. You can buy a memory mat of any one photo and just be like, hey, here you go, there you go, Merry Christmas. Another thing I like to stress to people, that if you're really serious about photography and you want to get better at it, go buy a cheap, it doesn't have to be digital like this, but go buy a cheap light meter. That way you can learn what light is like. I don't know how many times I've carried my light meter around, no camera, just taking the light meter around and just kind of, okay, so that light's giving off f4 at 100 ISO, and this one's giving off f6 at whatever. And it gave me an idea. It started building a sense of, I could actually look at the scene and go, you know what? The camera's not looking at this right because that f-stop's way too high because that light is not that bright. And it gives you an opportunity to start playing around and start looking at, well, is this bright enough, not bright enough, so on and so on. So, it's kind of a neat thing. You could buy a light meter for $80 now. I mean, their little analog thing that just kind of gives you a readout at ISO 100 of your incident light. Buy one, take it around with you. For all you iPhone and iPad people and Android people, you can really have some fun with this too. I mean, I'm not saying that you shouldn't have fun with this, but there's two things you got to remember with the iPad and the iPhone and Android phones and Windows phones and these webcam cameras. Even my webcam here, the one that I'm using, I actually have a low-res webcam. So if I were to take a single picture of this, I would only get 640 by 480. So it's not even a megapixel. It's like a half a megapixel. So you got to look at what your device can do. If you can do 10 megapixels, 7 megapixel, whatever. But the real key here is the big difference between phones and mobile devices and full cameras or larger cameras is the fact that the lens opening and the glass in the lens is probably only a couple elements, and it's very, very tiny compared to, maybe my SLR, the lens opening is this big. So it's something to keep in mind, and that's kind of like lens resolution. I know that's kind of like a weird term per se. Lens resolution versus camera resolution. Lens resolution is kind of like how much can the lens actually bring in, how much light in detailed, individual, seeing individual pieces or contrast in between different things. What can it bring into the camera so when the cameras actually capture something on the image sensor, you're getting this, okay? And that's lens resolution. Most webcams, most phones, most iPads, iPhones, whatever, don't have a lot of lens resolution, but now have a lot bigger sensor resolution or camera resolution. So they've kind of compensated so it does work well, and you can get some awesome prints and awesome stuff off of some of the phones and stuff. Now, what are some good tips of doing 3/4 portraits for those people? One of the tips from a loyal listener was, I want to hear more about doing photography with phones. I'm not big on phones, but I will give you some great tips because I've shot many people's phones at weddings or out and about where, they're like, hey, can you take our picture? Yeah, sure. And I've learned that there's several things that always bug me about these phones or iPads or whatever. You pull up and you got the iPad, where's my other hand? That's that hand, that's that hand. So you pull up and you go to aim it, you get it all set, and you're looking at the preview on the screen. And then you go, okay, everybody smile, 1, 2, 3, and you push the button, and you got about a second and a half before it actually takes the picture. And that's called shutter lag. Now, phones being phones, it's really a video camera taking a bunch of frames and then picking the best one out of those frames. And that's basically kind of like what it's doing. And that's why you get that shutter lag. It's going, okay, focus, 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 focus. That's the best one. Got it. There you go. Here's your photo. And that's really kind of the thing. Now, you talk about an SLR. When you pull that trigger halfway, it's focused. You finish pulling it, it's snapping. It's not a shutter lag situation. I mean, the minute you pull, if you're already pre-focused, you just fire away. Every time you pull that trigger, you're firing. It's just like firing a gun. Bang, 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 bang. Big difference between phone and camera. But here's what you really do. This is how you get better pictures. Especially, you can even get senior portrait pictures with your phone camera. You just have to remember 3 basic rules. 3 basic rules. 1, you got shutter lag. So you got to remember to have the person and yourself hold the camera still and hold their pose, or time it so that you know that, okay, if I say 1, 2, I'm pulling the trigger there. 3, they do the pose, and right when they get done doing the pose, you're shooting the picture. That's first. Know your shutter lag and time it out. Figure out how to time it out good, and get the best shot. 2, your camera, since it has such a small opening, is going to have such a large depth of field just because the way physics works. So you're going to get a lot in focus. So you're not going to have a real easy way to blur out the background just through the camera or through the phone or whatever. It's going to get as much as possible front to back in focus, which could be bad. I mean, artistically, you might not want to see the details of the leaves sitting behind the person. So that's something else to keep in mind, is the depth of field is going to be huge. So when we talk about getting somebody off the background so that we get it blurs out, if you got a phone, if you got an iPad, you got to put them further away than what I might be able to do with a SLR, or somebody else might be able to do with a point and shoot. So that's rule 2. Rule 3, you got to have good light, and it has to be continuous light. I wouldn't recommend flashlight because, when you flash, it might not flash at the right time unless there's a specific app now that gives you the ability to use flashes, but I haven't seen it yet. So if you find one, email me, thedigitalbabble@gmail.com, and I will definitely go look at it. But get your lighting so the ambient, the light in the room, the light in the scene is lighting your subject the way you want your subject to be lit. That way, when you take your photo with your phone or your iPad, it's pre-lit, it looks good, it's going to look sharp, time it, boom, and you get the picture. So those are your 3 rules. Be prepared for the shutter lag, and time the shutter lag. So when you tell your subject to pose, they're posing, you're not making them hold it for 4 minutes or 4 seconds or something. You want to capture that moment when the smile first happens, or maybe the look first happens, or they flip their head and the hair just goes all over, and you want that shot. So you got to time things. So that's rule 1. 2, be careful of depth of field. Looking at the depth of field, how much further do you got to be away from the background to blur the background is dependent on what you have, but that's something to take into account. If the background's still tack sharp and your subject's still tack sharp, you're too close. Move the subject away from the background, focus on the subject again, try again. You might be able to blur it out some. And I forgot what rule 3 was. Oh, lighting. Make sure your lighting's good. Make sure it's continuous lighting, like a light bulb, the sun, something that you can leave on. A flashlight, you can even do it with flashlights. I've seen people light their subjects with several flashlights and gotten some pretty neat results. So that is the 3 tips for using with your phone or your iPad to get some good shots. Now, for all your SLR people, you know what I'm going to say next. Get a decent flash unit. You can do a lot of these things without having to have continuous lighting, but I've always been a fan of continuous lighting or ambient lighting because it looks more natural. It looks more like they're in the scene. So there you go. 3/4 portraits. I'll run it down real quick for taking good 3/4 portraits. Don't cut people off at a joint. Don't cut them off at a joint. It'll look like they're a zombie. Like the picture ends, so doesn't their body right there. Try not to cut off don't cut off apertures or their limbs in weird ways. You know, try to include enough of it so when you're looking at it, it looks somewhat natural. It's just that you zoomed in closer. Get the camera down lower. You're going to want the camera on the same level as the person's chest. And then you want the center dot in the lens or the center of the picture to be right at the person's chest. That's how you know you got it kind of level and you kind of aim in the right area. You want the shoulders and the head up in the upper third. Everything else can fall wherever it wants. And then, you know, make sure that you get a lot of light source. Even if it's from a flash unit, sometimes you can get a lot of light source out of the flash unit. But the bigger the light source, the more the shadows get softened up. Now, one thing I did want to show you real quick was this shot. Excuse me. And I'm going to play with this one in Photoshop here in a minute, too. This is a 3/4 shot, but it's taken at a high angle to a low angle. And I'm using the grass as a background and the leaves as a background. I'm not so high where her head is distorted, you know, into this big head and then the rest of her body's small. It's fairly proportionate where, you know, you can kind of tell everything's about where it should be. I didn't cut her off at any major any major appendages, or, you know, her arms are still intact, her head's still intact. The only thing I'm a little upset with is I didn't have her reach all the way around the pole to put her fingers in the bottom third there. I see that now, so it does look like her arms cut off a little bit, but really by the end of the day, it's not bad. The sunlight was just kind of flopping in and giving us a lot of light. It was kind of a backlit, so you can see in her hair there, the sunlight's lighting her hair a little bit, so it's separating her a little bit from the background. The background being the blurred out leaves in the background there. I think the only thing I would have probably done just a touch different would be probably move the flash over to the right of me so that dark shadow there by her hair wasn't there anymore. I think that would be the only thing I would probably change with this. Well, besides the fact that I got the color, I didn't get the color balance right in this either, but really I like the pose, I like the way she looks, I like the look in her eyes, I like that it's all off center. I like the fact that she's got everything moving again in this picture. Her hair makes some lines that make, you know, gives a sense of motion in the picture. I think everything has a curve to it, except for the one pole there, which is this static object in the entire thing. And this is taken at a high angle, so I'm probably 6 foot. Kayla's probably 5'2", maybe 5'4", and so I'm taking almost a foot above her down at her. And that's kind of what we're getting, is this kind of like not quite looking up at me, but kind of, you know. And it really does. I like this portrait. I like this pose for a lot of, you know, just kind of, you know, 3/4 pose scenarios. It could also be considered a head and shoulders shot, I suppose, because I'm really cutting her off at probably the lower part of her chest, maybe the belly button if you went far enough down. I'm not sure, but you know. I do like these pose. I do like these pose. So let's get in. Let's see, we're at 7:33. How about we do some Photoshop and get going with that stuff here? So I'm gonna go back to the host screen. So that's pretty much 3/4 shots. So okay, well, where does this fall in the senior portrait package and having fun with senior portraits, kind of like I was doing the series here? Before we did the head and shoulder shots, that's usually the yearbook, right? So I'm going to tie it all in together. Full length, that's usually kind of maybe some for in the yearbook, but mostly it's for family and friends, okay? This is me just kind of hanging out here. This is me playing soccer. This is me whatever. Full body portrait or full height portraits really give you the full sense. And, you know, you can get some interesting shots with that as well. You know, you can add in a car and have the person sit on the bumper of a car, or maybe lay across a hood of a car. Maybe you're kind of hanging out in a tree and you got one leg on one branch and one leg on the other branch, and then you're kind of leaning down in, you know, like you're looking down on everybody and you're kind of taking the picture upwards. That's a full length portrait as well. So it just depends on what you're looking for props and everything else, but you can get some quite interesting poses out of just being on the ground and doing some really simple stuff. Three-quarter portraits, I usually like to call these are my Facebook portraits. These are my share them around, more fun portraits. They're not really in the category of family, but they are. You know, you can give them to family and friends. But usually I like these for doing like the business card size, the player card size, or the handouts to friends. I mean, like the, let's go right into Photoshop. Well, let's see. Let's start with which one it is here. So here's the one that we were talking about, the three-quarter pose, you know, looking down, so on and so forth. This one could be an excellent candidate for putting the signature in, you know, putting something in. Let's clean it up a little bit. We got the blemish, you know, of course we can sharpen the eyes, maybe do some model stuff to it real quick. But really, this is such a great candidate for your wallet size, because right here you got all this empty space that you could play with. You could make a text engravement on the wood and go Kayla, you know, or Kayla. Oh, well, when did she graduate? 2010, I think. So Kayla 10 or Kayla 2010, or you know, whatever you want to do. You know, so I mean, it gives you a little bit of a desktop publishing feel where you can actually do something with this. The other thing is we could, what I like about this photo as well is the fact that we could do an offset of vignetti. So I'm going to draw the circle here. So it's kind of like this circle right here. And then we could vignetti and just kind of take and darken this whole area on the outside and soften it. So it's kind of like a shadow, or like just a nice darkening. And it'll like super focus your attention on her eyes, on her head, right where you kind of want to, like where she's staring you dead in the face. And it's perfect shot, I think, for these applications. So let's go take it into Photoshop. I'm headed to the Photoshop. All right, here we are in the Photoshop. So let's go take care of a few things. We're going to zoom in real tight here. We're going to grab a heel brush and make it big enough to work with. I didn't shrink this photo, that's why I'm working in, it's very big, very, very big. So I might be a little slow here getting this done, so bear with me. La la la, I want to keep the freckles because I like freckles. Freckles are our friends. Alright, I love the eyes. I still can't get over her eyes. They're such a, you know, as I zoom in, you look at her eyes, and it's like this hazel blue, and it's got a green tinge to it, and a brown tinge, and I mean, she's just got all sorts of colors actually in her eyes, which is neat. I just think it's neat. Notice that she's got a stray hair here, but I'm not going to play with that at this point. Okay, so I fixed up the one blemish. Okay, so let's get some color correction going here. Let's figure out what we want to do. I think I'm just going to do a photo. I'm going to do a filter down here. I'm going to click my half moon. I'm going to do a photo filter. I'm going to do a photo filter. Right here's photo filter. And it warmed it up already. I can see that it warmed it up. I'm going to just maybe take and maybe intensify it just a touch more. Almost. That's a little too much. See, like here's way too much. Let's back it off and probably right about, yeah, 47%, 46%. Yeah, I'm good with that. 46% is good. So you can always hit the undo buttons, like you can preview the undo down here by this little eyeball with the undo arrow. So there's what it looks like before. Here's what it looks like after. Here's what it looks like before. Here's what it looks like after. So you can always get some ideas of what it looks like. So let's see. So we got our first layer. So we just did that. Control Alt Shift E gives me a clone stamp brush. I'm going to sharpen this ever so slightly. So I'm going to do filter, sharpen, unsharpen mask, and I'm going to do probably exactly what I got here. Maybe just a touch more. I'm going to bring it up to 90%. So what this is going to do is it's going to sharpen the picture for me and make it nicey nice. So when we go to print it or we view it on screen, it's going to be nice and sharp. So it looks like it's really tack sharp. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy that layer by dragging it down to the new layer icon down here, which is right next to the trash, so be careful. And we're going to take and we're going to do a blur on it. We're going to do a filter, blur, and I'm just going to do a surface blur because I'm just kind of in a little bit of a hurry here. So I want to get near her eyes and her skin, and I want to see what I want. Let's see, let's bring it up just a touch. 6 with a threshold of 8 looks pretty good. And that's going to soften her skin nice. So we now have the blur going. So you see, you still get the freckles. But what I want to do is I want to bring everything back. So I'm going to mask out everything. So I'm going to hit the mask button. And then I'm going to go click up on the mask and go Control I to invert it. Now there's no effect. There's no blur effect. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to paint back in on the mask with white the original effect. And that's the idea behind masking. So we're going to take and get a nice big brush and just kind of go right over her face. I'm going to go over her eyes, even the details. Don't get in her hair too much. Da 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 da. Down here, anything else? Nope. Okay. So hit her chin one more time just because I think I missed it. So there we go. So we got her arm and we got her chin. So we got a nice surface blur going for it. Without the surface blur, all right, let me zoom in so you can really see the effect. Without the surface blur, with the surface blur. Without the surface blur, with the surface blur. So now what I want to do is I'm going to bring back the details that I want just the details on by painting black over them. So since I did the quick edit by going over everything, now I want to bring back details, particularly in her eyes. So as you can see, as I paint over these, you'll see that her eyelashes and her eyes become tack sharp again. You might want to work into the eyelid a little bit, just because you can blend a little bit easier, blurring and sharpening in skin, not in the creases or the wrinkles. Again, I'm going to hit up, take out some of that hair blur, but I'm going to hit up and get the hairs of her eyebrows nice and sharp. Same thing over on the other eye. Like so. So nice. Bring back details where we want the details and nothing else. La 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 la. Look in the middle here. Alright, get her eyebrow back into shape here. And get the details back for her eyebrow. Like so. Now, the reason why it takes several times for me to paint over, because I'm kind of like hitting the button and I'm coming across it, I'm painting it, then I'm coming back and looking, do I like it, do I not like it, you know, painting it again. I kind of have a workflow that works for me, which is I overpaint or I do multiple times with the paintbrush to get what I want. So like I just paint this back in and I'll show you like this area here. I'm like, okay, well there's some eyebrow lashes or eyebrows. Okay, eyebrow, yep, okay, no more eyebrow. Okay, so I don't have to paint any more there. Let's see, over here, eyelashes and the crease in the eye, yep, okay, click, click, click. Okay, I went too high there, so reverse it back to white and take out that little mark there and that little mark there. All right, cool. So there we go. We just softened her skin. We lightened her, well, we warmed her skin tones up because I had the wrong white balance on. And we lightened her skin complexion by blurring everything. We sharpened everything, so when we do have a sharpness to it, you know, where we're allowing sharpness to be, it's going to be tack sharp. Last step that I want to do to make, or two last steps that I want to do, is I want to make a vignette effect, and then what I want to do is do that whole Kayla thing on the railing here. So, which would be better? Probably we could do the vignette thing first, okay? Easy way to do that is grab the elliptical selection tool. So up here on the toolbar, the selection, and then over on the elliptical. And we're going to draw this oddball ellipse around her head, which I think I'm going to start right about here. And I'm going to bring it right to there so that her hair is going to be definitely in. Okay, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take select, and I'm going to modify. I'm going to feather it. And what this is going to do is make that whole selection really super soft. I'm not going to do it by 5 pixels. I'm going to do it by 200 pixels and see what I get. Maybe a little bit further. So let's do it again. Select, modify feather, modify feather by 200 more pixels. So now we're at 400 pixels. Okay, that might work. All right, so we select invert because we want the background to give me the color that I want. So like so, and I'm going to take and do a black and white. I'm going to fill it with black. And notice that's kind of how what it did. It gave me a nice vignette feel around the where the selection is. So select, deselect. We can even make it softer by blurring that layer because I made a new layer to put the vignette on. So let's blur it real quick with 5 minutes left to go. So I'm going to go Gaussian blur. And I'm going to go over here so I can see how blur I am. But I'm going to really super blur it. I think I'm going to super blur it. Oh, it's not blurring the way I thought it would. Okay, never mind. Well, we'll blur it anyway just to soften those edges up even more. So let's do it about 28 pixel, which is going to be a super soft edge. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the opacity and I'm going to drop it down about to 20-30%. Notice how as I bring it in, it darkens just the areas that I had selected or I painted over. So I don't want it to be so harsh like that where it's very obvious. I want it to be subtle. So here's without, and we add a little bit at a time until we get the feel that I'm looking for. Whoever said photography can't be artistic, I think it is very artistic because, you know, just snapping a picture, okay, maybe not necessarily artistic because, I mean, especially snapshots, you know, anybody can pull a trigger and be like snap, 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 and hopefully get something. If you have intent or you do stuff with intent, it's totally artistic. Just like here, this is with intent. We're taking this portrait with intent. We have a reason for the pose. We have a reason for the vignette. Now I have a reason to start a new layer. And now I'm going to put that whole font thing in. So let's grab the text command and get in here and type in KY. I probably spelled her name wrong, but that's okay. I'm sure she'll forgive me. And if she doesn't, that's okay too. So it's really small in this large picture, so I got to bring it up quite a bit. Let's get it up to 72. Nope, let's try 200. There we go. That's going to get a little better. So there's Kayla. Let's try Control T, post Control, drag it out here. There's that. Probably right there. I do not like that font. Let's try something simple. How about Skigo Script or Seago Script? Okay, I like that. That's pretty good. I'm going to then turn it as I want it to go over here. Ooh, hello, it's red. I didn't realize it was red. Okay, turn. Now this is where we could kind of get fun and make it kind of fit the photo. Whoops. Edit, undo. Control T here. We can actually make it fit in the photo by might have made it too big that way. Let's try it this way. All right, so we know that's a K, we know that's a Y. Now this is neat. I love doing this. This is fun. So with some of the effects that we can do a bevel and emboss. So we're going to do an inner bevel, and we're going to do it by, I don't know, probably quite a bit. I'm not sure, probably 30 pixels or so. Okay, and what we're going to do is we're going to take the fill out so there's no fill to it. Notice now it's kind of translucent and it takes on the view of the wood, so it's almost like it's engraved into the wood. And then what we can do is then also increase the stroke and take the stroke and maybe do, like, you know, just a touch just to give it a little oomph off of the wood so it really looks like it's there but not there. And, you know, like, here you go. So something subtle. There's Kayla's name in her own picture. This is now a nice candidate for a 3.5 by 2.5 wallet size photo. And, you know, maybe you can do something with it. And we could continue working on this until we get it to where we really like it. But let's save it real quick. Save as. I don't want to run over too far here. JPEG. And we're going to go new. Yes, I want to replace it. All right. Okay. And that was a simple, 10-minute process of doing, a few minor Photoshop tricks, and you can get so much out of it. So the original, here's the original. Voila. Color cast is wrong. Look at her face. Her color cast is bluish green. The eyes are beautiful, but really need to be warmed up. The whole thing needs to be warmed up. Got this wonderful empty space to do something with. It's kind of nice. Want to make sure that we soften the skin, but at the same time, we want to make sure to keep the details, especially in those eyes and in the lips and the mouth. And let's see what we got. So there's the original. Whoops. There's the original. Here's now the edited. So a little warmer. Got the vignette working around the outside. Got her name on the thing. So, we could have put Kayla 2010, Kayla whatever, and it would have been just fine. So nice little easy Photoshop tips, I guess. So that's it for this week of the Digital Babble. I've kind of concluded our whole senior portrait kind of 3-step series, giving you all the different ones. So we're going to move on to something else. I don't know what yet, but if you got suggestions, please send us an email, thedigitalbabble@gmail.com, or go check out our website at tdbny.com. And you can always catch us every Wednesday night at 7 p.m. here live on fingerlakes1.com and fingerlakes1.tv. And I'm Flipper, your host of the Digital Babble. And as I say every week, I will catch you on the flip side.
A Flipside Studio production. It's the Digital Babble. Tune in every Wednesday at 7 p.m. on fingerlakes1.com. Check us out on Facebook and Twitter.